Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got our first news video in a while, and it's kind of a mixture of news, reviews, just discussions about a lot of things that have been going on in the world of Star Wars. But now that the Bad Batch Season 3 has ended, the Bad Batch series has ended, we have a lot to talk about for the next month before we get into Acolyte, where we'll pick up again with the weekly reviews and discussions and Q&As. So this week we're going to do a little bit of a recap of everything that's been going on these past few weeks, past month or so in Star Wars that we haven't yet gotten to talk about on the channel. We've been trying to stay really up to date with our reviews and with our reactions to trailers and stuff. So you can see our thoughts on the channel with the variety of those latest releases, but we haven't got to talk to all of you guys about them. So we're going to talk about Tales of the Jedi here. We're going to talk about the Phantom Menace 25th anniversary. Hopefully you all got to see that in the theaters. It's still going to be showing next week because it was number 2 at the box office last weekend. Another $10 million almost it made. And that I'm loving that. I'm loving that people are appreciating it and going back to see it, even though it is one of the only Star Wars movies to have gotten re-released, recently, relatively recently, 12 years ago. But I saw it back in 3D back in the day. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about our trip to the theater to see the Skywalker Saga Marathon. I'm not sure if too many of you guys got to see that or do that on May the 4th. It wasn't in too many cities, but some did it. Some hosted a marathon of all 9 movies. So we're going to talk about our trip to go see that. We're going to talk about the Acolyte if you guys want to. Anything else you want to bring up? This is a live Q&A as always. So in between topics, after Seneca and I give our opinions on them, we'll take your guys' questions or your comments as they're rolling in through the chat. And then eventually, when we get through all the topics, it'll be purely based on your live Q&A. So make sure you send in questions, comments, theories, whatever you'd like to talk about in the world of Star Wars or movie news or anything you want. Send it in the chat and we will get to it as soon as we can. If you want to make sure you get a chat on tonight's show, we're going to go about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the flow of the show. Make sure you send in a super chat. That greatly helps out the channel, and it sends your chat to the top, and we make sure we get to it before we log off for tonight's episode. So without further ado, let's get to Tales of the Jedi, which is the thing I think we should, Tales of the Empire, excuse me. I think we should lead off the show with, because that was the latest episode. I mean, I guess in the spirit of our Bad Batch shows, right, where we were doing lives to talk about each episode of the Bad Batch, let's do a live here to talk about Tales of the Empire. All 6 episodes of the newest season dropped. 3 episodes about Morgan Elsbeth, 3 episodes about Barriss Offee. We did release a review if you want to hear our more probably long-winded thoughts there, where we discuss the actual, plotting, the character arcs, all that type of stuff. But Sonic, what were your just general thoughts for those people who didn't watch the review, or just anything else you might have thought of since we reviewed Tales of the Empire? What were your thoughts on Tales of the Empire?
Well, I guess one thing that's definitely improved over what has already been pretty consistently growing for me is that I'm really appreciating the Bears storyline. I know there are a lot of criticisms for what the show has been able to do with this 10-minute-ish format, and I still think those are all completely valid. But I do like the structure of it. I do love that she is back to being a proper healer instead of just another apprentice and a foil to Ahsoka. Now she's kind of being able to strike out on her own, reference the best parts about her Legends portrayal, and now she's got this potentially bright future. I mean, again, if they think this is like the end for her, they can fill in a bunch of media and all that and then just leave it as is and have her take out the Fourth Inquisitor from the equation. That could be a pretty interesting way to end her story regardless. But, I'm glad that we got answers to it. I'm happy about that. I still don't mind the Morgan story. It really is that first episode that gives you a lot of hope because it does introduce some very cool things, like a really fully realized Grievous for the first time in a while. I know he's got some great moments throughout the early Clone Wars seasons, but not with this animation, not with that O3 cackling and like psychoticness. And I was definitely a big fan in general of just seeing the Mountain Clan. I guess they're not technically called the Singing Mountain Clan, but these Lightsiders, that was a big thing during our trailer reaction. We're like, what is that big like white light coming from him? Like, it can't really be Morgan, right? Like, she hasn't she doesn't necessarily even power up until Ahsoka, and even then, I would say that is fairly limited to what she can do or what's being shown, and it doesn't really line up with Night Sister magic there. So I was very pleased to see like, hey, there's a reason for that. It's because it's an entirely different clan. It's a entirely different group. It is going back to the original portrayer of Dathomir and the different clans involved. How it's not necessarily Jedi versus Sith for them, but they do have these variations. I'm glad that this could open the door for the future of the Dathomir storyline in Thrawn's Return, in Ahsoka season 2, or the Mando movie, or wherever it may be. It is that second and third episode that, even though they have some pretty interesting moments, especially that second episode with Rook, the third episode, it's nice to see New Republic in animation. That's really about it. It is that first episode that makes you go like, there is something more here. And then by the end, you're like, I'm not really seeing the entire connection for why she is the way she is, why she's so adamant about getting revenge against an enemy that is no longer, right? Maybe she doesn't know that, and maybe that could have been something to be really introduced or like explored. But with this short format, you can't really do that. But then again, I'm not keeping up to the same standard as I would for a Bad Batch, or Clone Wars, or Rebels. I think with the time limit, for me, if it looks cool, it's already doing quite a bit for me. I think that's kind of where that O3 Clone Wars mentality kind of seeps in a bit. Even though those are micro episodes, this is a little bit more like a double length at minimum. I still kind of treat it the same way, because as long as I'm getting like a big major beat of the story and that can be worked around it, I'm fine with that. So yeah, I'm happy about it. I hope there's a proper Tales of the Jedi season 2. I hope that there's more other tales of, like we've been talking about. I know you're a big fan of Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and it'd be great to see like a possible like Dengar into Rothgar situation. If you're going to
Yeah.
make that happen, make that happen. But this would be maybe an ideal format for that. Just be like, all right, here's a story that can be explored. You can still do all the Dengar stuff. You can do the Rothgar stuff later if you really want to be connected. There's other characters I think would simply be better for this. People who can be fleshed out and already have a lot of story, or characters that you don't care too much about. But regardless, I enjoyed the show. I'm just, it wasn't my priority with the Acolyte trailer, with the preview that we got to see, and then obviously the marathon.
Yeah, and David Fieldson sends in a super chat. Thank you so much, David, as always, for promoting the show. We really appreciate your support. It says, I'm out tonight hanging out with some friends. Just dropped in to show some support for your channel. You guys have good analysis and knowledge. Keep it up. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that, and we try our best to give you guys a firm analysis as well as our, unfiltered opinions about the things we all love in the world of Star Wars. So we greatly appreciate that, and thank you so much for your continued support of the channel. But yeah, as for my opinion on Tales of the Empire, I was a less high on it than you. I gave it a 3 if you go watch our review out of 5, which might seem like a, you know, below average review in today's world because everybody wants 5 stars or 1 star, but really I feel like it was pretty average. If Tales of the Jedi was above average, it was really really strong. It was I would say about a 4 for me. This was certainly a step down, and I think I enjoyed the Barris stuff. I had a lot of criticism about the way you string out story in this format, not giving enough real growth to these characters when we see certain life events jump really far into the future. And that was my biggest criticism with the third episode. I think beat by beat, story by story, it works, but ultimately you do have to like kind of fill in those gaps in your head. It is a tradition in Star Wars to fill in gaps in your head, but I think when you're exploring characters that especially who have been prevalent in TV, you're used to seeing a little bit longer format with them. I do think you do a bit of a disservice to just only discuss big moments in their life and not really give the journey towards those big moments. And so that was what I felt towards the end with Barris. But ultimately did enjoy the show, and I can't wait for more. Tales of the Bounty Hunter and Tales from Jabba's Palace are the ones I would like to see most next. I mean, Tales from the New Republic also. If we could finally get like Clone Wars animated style Luke, Han, Leia, that would be pretty awesome, which most likely will not be what they do. if they did Tales from the New Republic, it's going to end up being, the Armorer or somebody, from on the side. But I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see more. I love that Mara Jade story and the Jabba's Palace one to come fully canon at some point. That would be pretty cool. But we'll see what they do. Let us know what you guys thought though of Tales of the Empire in the chat. We both enjoyed it. I was more lukewarm on it, but liked it overall. Sonic, I think, liked it a little bit more than me, but was also a little more underwhelmed than he was for Tales of the Jedi. Let us know your thoughts. Maybe you guys absolutely loved it and we're wrong. Let us know why we're wrong in the chat so we can have that discussion, and we'll bring up your chats in a little bit, even after we move on to the next topic, which I think will be kind of a joint topic for us because we didn't watch the Phantom Menace by itself last weekend. We watched it with the other 8 Star Wars Skywalker Saga movies. So let's talk a little bit about that. Sonic has a video that we filmed. He's editing that will be coming out tomorrow, I believe, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Tomorrow, kind of a vlog that we did. If you watched our Return of the Jedi vlog we did last year, a similar style, similar vlog where we review and talk about every single one of the Skywalker Saga movies as we go through that 24-hour marathon of the entire Skywalker Saga in a Regal Theater. But specifically, let's start with Phantom Menace, Sonic, and then we'll talk a little bit about the whole experience. How'd you enjoy the experience of seeing Phantom Menace? First time for you, right, in the theater for Phantom Menace? How'd
Yeah.
you enjoy seeing that? And then after that, talk about a little bit of the whole experience.
I mean, it's hard not to get carried away, right? It's that feeling of, hey, I'm getting to see something that back in 99 everyone was dying to see, right? And then in some ways it still is that almost crux point of like how the fandom changed so drastically for so many people. And yeah, you can make the arguments that it's actually the Last Jedi, or no, it's been going on since the very first sequel with The Empire Strikes Back, and both of those are valid. But the hype that was there for this movie, and we were too young to remember this, right?
Yeah.
We were only kids who grew up like with DVDs and VHSs of this, and maybe if someone had a nice big CRTV back in the day, we're like, oh man, this is probably like the closest thing it felt like to watching this. And it wasn't, because once I finally got sat down with that crowd, with everyone, the people who came into cosplay and everything, like it was awesome. It was not something I was expecting to be like sucked into immediately. I thought maybe I'd work my way into it a little bit more and be ready by Revenge of the Sith, but or like stay even keel until A New Hope, or just like one of those movies where it is not objectively, but for the most part, well received compared to the prequels. And I don't know, man. I was just carried away. It was fun, and it was awesome. And I'll say it's in the review, but or like the vlogish review that we did. But as much criticism as as Jake Lloyd got, unfortunately, he is that beating heart of the film. He is the moment like he comes on, everything else that for me was starting to feel like a little stilted, especially on the some of the earlier stuff on Naboo. Once we get to Tatooine, I don't know, it all clicked into gear. It was like he was that beating heart, and he's always been for me. But this time, I don't know. I think with the crowd, with his energy, with the humor, it all just worked. It lined up so well. And man, pod racing in the theater, man, that was
Yeah.
insane. The sound of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like we weren't in anything like massive right away. We got to eventually move into an RPX for 3, 4, and 5, but that theater was still like 90 to 100 seats. It was a great crowd. Everyone was like settled in. You're like, we're not moving until the movie's done, and it was awesome. So yeah, that was a great way to start it. I don't think I necessarily would have had that same feeling with A New Hope or with The Force Awakens, even though like, I definitely enjoyed both of those as much, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
There was something about like everyone just being so excited, and it being the 25th anniversary, it makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was awesome.
It was. And it's a movie that I've always loved. My first Star Wars movie ever. Certainly, when you get older, you can see all the flaws with it, but there's nothing that will replace that experience like falling in love with Star Wars for the first time, and that for me was the Phantom Menace, and getting to see it with a crowd of people who also really appreciated it, I think was a big moment for me personally, a part of that marathon especially. But just the fact that it made $10 million last weekend, like for a re-release of a movie that, for all intents and purposes, is pretty divisive, making $10 million, that means people went and saw it and appreciated it and enjoyed it for what it is. And finally we can kind of have a celebration of the Phantom Menace. Yeah, there are plenty of people out there, and might be some of you watching right now, who hate this movie, and that's fine too. But right now I'm glad that there's a little bit of joy surrounding what ultimately was a lot of our entry points into Star Wars. And I think that was something that will always be an important piece of what the Phantom Menace is for the fabric of this franchise that we all love. And so I really enjoyed that experience, but seeing it with the crowd was great. I remember when I saw it in 3D in 2012, there was like nobody there. And I think it did pretty well ultimately in the box office. It might have just been whenever I went to see it, but I remember going and there were like maybe 5 people in the theater. And this time with the packed, sold out crowd, people laughing at every Jar Jar joke, people laughing at some of the goofy lines, cheering for all the character entrances like Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, or Anakin, or Padme, or Maul. A lot of cheers for Maul. That was a really cool experience. And I hope a lot of you got to have that experience, for those of you who really enjoy the Phantom Menace, because it's something that I think for a lot of us has either grown on us or really helped us discover our love of Star Wars. So I really enjoyed that, and I do kind of wish we were in that RPX theater for for the pod race, because that's one of the best designed scenes in any film for sound. Like, it's one of the best soundscapes in any movie for any big action blockbuster scene. And man, it would have been great to hear it in some premium sound format, but still definitely worth seeing it in the theater. And I kind of want to go back and see it one more time before it's out, because watching it as the first part of 9, it kind of, you can't really let it seep in as much as just watching it by itself and leaving the theater and really getting to think about it and feel it after it's over. So yeah, definitely looking forward to hopefully seeing it one more time before it's out of the theaters. But then, yeah, now let's talk about the rest of them, because we got to see the other 8 in theaters as well. That was such a cool event, and they did a great job. We went to the Irvine Spectrum and saw it at the Regal there, and they did a great job with the event. I mean, everything from the price to the amenities to the comfort of the theater to the friendliness of the staff, and how much they wanted us to just have fun. That kept being something that people were reiterating every time they would introduce the next movie was, are you guys having a good time? What can we do to make it more fun? That was something that I really appreciated about the whole experience. So shout out to them for sure for making that experience so great. But Seneca, talking about the rest of these, obviously you've seen 7, 8, 9 in the theaters, and you saw Return of the Jedi last year with me, and you and I both saw separately, but we saw Empire Strikes Back right when it released during COVID. How was it seeing the rest of these in the theaters? Revenge of the Sith, first time in 20 years. How was it seeing the rest of this, the Skywalker Saga, again in the theaters?
Well, don't mention that 20-year part, because I don't want to start feeling a little old here for Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, I mean, it has been a long time. Yeah, I mean, I also want to give a shout out to Regal Irvine. I think it was Jake After Dark is what his nickname was once it reached like 10 or 11 p.m.
Mhm.
And he, technically speaking, for the marathon screenings, not all of them were showing the Acolyte preview. They weren't like required to, which was something that was only paired with the Phantom Menace one. And I managed to, like, after the first one, I asked the lady who was there, I was like, are we going to be able to see uh, what is it, this Acolyte preview that everyone's been like talking about and getting hyped for? And they're like, oh yeah, maybe, like, you can ask like Jake After Dark when he swaps in, and he's like the general manager of that theater. And then I guess I said it once, and then like immediately after Attack of the Clones finished, people were like, "Oh my god, like we want to watch the Acolyte trailer." Like people were just screaming. I was like, "Oh, okay." I raised my hand nicely, but now people are like
Started
demanding
a
it.
firestorm.
Yeah, exactly. And then he's like, "Okay." And then they obviously we were fortunate enough to move over to the RPX because it was, it's at that point like 11 p.m. No one's going to be interfering with us. And before we even got to watch Revenge of the Sith, and we got great seats for that as well, we got to see the Acolyte preview. And yeah, I mean, that was awesome. Just the fact that they were so accommodating, and they were like, we kind of have to patch it from the Phantom Menace file server into this. And I was like, I'm not expecting this to happen. It was just nice to just to ask and see if it was a possibility. And then
Mhm.
I guess, I was the spark for the resistance. I sparked the lights to fire, and it made it happen. So I was glad everyone seemingly there was also very pumped for it, which is definitely nice because especially here on YouTube, on Twitter, and everywhere else, it's so easy to like succumb to people being like, "Oh, like this is gonna be the worst thing ever." But I don't know. That preview looked pretty solid, right? The choreography looked quite good. I liked some of the physicality of it. It didn't feel super floaty like I was fearing from that first trailer. And then that second trailer came out, I think, on May 4th itself, and people were like, "Oh no, like I still think there's still negativity around it, and that's not going to change until people watch it, or maybe it never does." But it was nice that that weekend kind of seems to have at least amplified some of the more positive voices around the Acolyte, which I was very happy to see. But as far as like the screenings go, I mean, Attack of the Clones, it always gets better for me. Always gets better for me. And it's really that second half. It's really the fact that Obi-Wan's actually got a genuinely great storyline. Um, People being able to laugh off some of the creepier Anakin moments at the start of that relationship. Like I understand that he's awkward, that he's being raised by a bunch of monks and all that, but some of that eye contact, some of the dialogue choices, the fact that he's just like touching her, I'm just like, all right, buddy, like this is not working for you, but it does because somehow George Lucas is like, this is how romance works, right? And it worked for Anakin, obviously. But yeah, no, I think that second half really clicked, especially Battle of Geonosis. It's always been a battle that I'm not like super fond of, but I think it's been getting better and better for me. And seeing it on the big screen with a little bit more detail, I think that really helped pop it out a bit more for me than just going back to that very obvious critique that everyone has of like, oh, it's just once that sandstorm kind of hits over every clone trooper and droid, you're seeing that for like 5-10 minutes, but it's not. It's like a 10-second sequence, and you're still like
Oh,
doing a bunch.
it's one of the best too.
Yeah, and then you're seeing all these other things happen, right? So yeah, I'll criticize that the Dooku Anakin fight is like kind of hidden away, and not, we're not using a composite of Christopher Lee's face to get a little bit more dynamic action, especially with how great Episode One's fight is. But no, it's a film that's definitely improving for me, and having the crowd kind of laugh away some of the more awkward moments made for everything else that I enjoy about the film to get really good. Revenge of the Sith was awesome. I mean, I think I've slightly been dropping a little bit here and there about like my love and interest, and not enough to say like it's not my second favorite Star Wars film, but to be like, maybe is it getting a little overrated? Maybe is it like just like a bunch of memes that have been propping up this film for the last 5-6 years? But nah, seeing it in RPX, like I was like, dang, like that opening scene, the whole battle course hunt, incredible. The lightsaber duel is incredible. That turn, it's so devastating. It's dark. It is Hayden's best acting. I think he's quite solid in the back half of Attack of the Clones, but here he's good. He only has a couple moments that feel like wooden to me. So seeing the visuals of Mustafar and everything, yeah, it was awesome. A New Hope. I don't think I can really say much about it other than it was great, and I didn't really notice any of like the artifacting and some of the old qualities of like being a film from '77, the cheapest Star Wars film, and always will be the cheapest Star Wars film. But yeah, it was great. Empire was great. I think it was nice to see it without the whole issue of, I don't know if it's the same thing for you, but in 2020 they were not using the Disney Plus Ultra HD editions because I couldn't just tell based on my theater, but Hoth was very blue, so it looked like the Blu-ray versions, and it did not necessarily look like the 4K restoration, which is a lot closer to the original appearance. But yeah, this time Hoth, everything, it's a perfect film. think people were starting to get pretty tired at that point. So we were like, all right, it's like 3 a.m. or something. It's like
I think it
we
was
got to
later. I
get
think it was
through
like
this.
5 or 6
5,
when we
6,
did
yeah, something
it.
like time was lost at that point, right? So I think people were like sputtering a little bit, and it was probably the quietest of the films. I think people were appreciative. I don't think people are going to be like, "Oh, I hated Empire," but it's just like it's such a tonally serious movie at times that you have to kind of let it wash over you. And at 5 a.m. after so many movies, you're just like, "Yeah, this is a perfect film. What else is new?" And Return of the Jedi is good. I think my thoughts have always improved on it since last year. Still not the biggest fan, but I will admit I also took like a little tiny bit of breaks, close my eyes for a few minutes here and there because I was just like, I've seen it last year on a bigger screen. Like, this is fine. They moved us back to our original theater as well at that point. So, not as much interest for me. And I think you were also saying like there was moments where you closed your eyes a little bit too. But yeah, no, it was fun. It was good. And then 7 through 9, that's the one I was like, I need to know how people are gonna feel about that. And The Force Awakens, the crowd was into it. Like I think everyone got like a fourth or fifth win at that point, and I found myself appreciating that film a lot more than I have in the last few years. I really did enjoy it. 8, I also really appreciated. It was a very positive crowd for that too. And even though there were moments that I felt a little bit more frustrated by, the highs were somehow higher for me. So it is that film that has so many polar opposites. It can have some of the greatest things ever in Star Wars and scenes that you can groan for. And I'm pretty sure people were like kind of groaning for that Rose line at the very end. I think that's the first time where even like sequel lovers were like, "Yeah, man, I can't defend this one." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. It's not just me, you're right." So it was nice to see that. But nine, you're just trying to get out of the theater. You're like, "We've made it this far." And like the overlapping dialogue, it's never been too much of an issue for me, but I really felt that this watch, I was just like, I want to hear you guys just talk to each other. You can have this banter, just space it out by like a half second in between instead of talking over each other the whole time. It is messy. It is like a lot of like, oh, this person's died. Not really. They're alive here. And it's always bothered me here and there, but I think I felt it a lot more this time. And I still had a good time. By the end, I was just like, it is what it is. It's still good. I didn't get a lot of the Shadow of the Sith washing over me for the Dayton scenes and everything, but knowing that the knowledge is there, knowing a little bit more about Exegol, I guess it helped it a little bit for me. But by the end, man, I was just like, wow, we're done. Walked out of the theater. I was like, I don't know how my eyes are open, but
Yeah.
it was a great time. It was just work by the very end. Even if the
Yeah.
crowd was there, even if it was, I would still say 60 to 70% of people who started this showing were still there by the end. It was good. I was pretty impressed by everyone's willingness to be there. And I mean, if you're signing up for this ticket and you're showing up the day of, it's because you're in it for the long haul. And yeah, it was a good time. I'm glad I got to do it at least once.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I would do it again. I don't know if I'd stay for all 9, but I would for sure do the whole experience again. It was so much fun, and like I said earlier, the theater staff, the crowd, everything was really up to par. It was exactly what I was hoping for and more. I think it definitely exceeded my expectations. I kind of expected the crowd to be less enthusiastic for certain films or less enthusiastic as the night went on, but there were those people like us who were just in it for the long haul. They were about, every time a new one started, that enthusiasm, the clapping, the cheering, all of it came back every single time, and I thought that was one of the highlights for me. For me, nothing can replace the theatrical experience for watching films because it's one of the reasons I love The Force Awakens so much. And it's one of the reasons why, like, over time, The Force Awakens has come back down to more maybe where the first time I watched it, overall opinion. Still love the movie, but not, the like all-time great movie that I thought it was, after three, four, five, six, 7 times watching it originally when it came out. But the crowd really does it for you. The fact that people cheer and get into it and enjoy the moments, it's unlike anything else in the movie watching experience, something TV can never do, something that streaming can never do, theatrical window, getting to see things in the theaters with other people. it's irreplaceable, especially if you're into movies or pop culture or franchises like this. Everything is better in the theater. So I really loved getting this whole experience, and I loved that the people there were all in as into it as we were. And yeah, for me, I mean, I had already seen Phantom Menace 12 years ago in the theater, so that was exciting, but getting to see it again was very fun. Attack of the Clones was the only Star Wars movie I have not seen in a theater, so I really appreciated that. I mean, I completely agree with you. The Attack of the Clones, second half of Attack of the Clones has always been one of my favorite Star Wars movies. The arena was like my thing as a kid. You know, that was the scene that every day come home from school before Revenge of the Sith came out, of course, but every day when I came home from school, that was the one I turned on and rewatched over and over and over again, and knew all the moves, you know, knew all the things that they did in the fight, reenact it. It was so much fun watching Attack of the Clones growing up. Yeah, you skipped the first half. I think the only thing I would watch in the first half was Django versus Obi-Wan. And then I'd skip all the way to the end as a kid and watch the arena battle. And the Clone Wars beginning at the Battle of Geonosis, just every time I watch it, it's better and better and better. I absolutely love that scene with the dust clouds. I think it's beautiful. The way you see the blaster bolts, the blue and red screaming through the sand. It's so cool. It's such a great moment. Um, but yeah, almost honestly, one of the top Star Wars movies of all time in the second half. I still prefer Phantom Menace overall because it is pretty excruciating, that romance. But it was fun. The people, everybody was laughing at it. Like we were all having fun. People were yelling at the screen, you know, saying funny stuff when Anakin would have lines. People cheered when he said, "I don't like sand." You know, it was it was a blast. And then Revenge of the Sith, haven't seen it almost 20 years. Next year is 20 years, almost 19 years, because it was May 19th, 2005 that it came out. So almost 19 years since we've seen it in the theaters. And man, yeah, that was pretty awesome getting to see that in the premium experience, premium sound, premium screen. Definitely worthwhile. And I would go back just to watch it again. The success of Phantom Menace means they absolutely will be showing Revenge of the Sith next year. I would be completely shocked if that doesn't get a re-release in the theaters. Maybe not the full Skywalker Saga. I think they will do it again if this was a success. But these studios, I mean, there's so many things have been making so much money. Everyone's doing it. Got the Lord of the Rings coming back. We had just had the Mummy come out. I know there are like Hitchcock movies coming out throughout the summer. Ghibli's been doing this forever, but there are so many re-releases coming out, partially to paper over, you know, the COVID and strike lack of new content. But really, they've been making so much money off of not doing anything by just showing movies that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old that why not? You know, and it's a way for all of us to come back to the theaters, rejoin, reunify. And I think for those people who might be on the edge about coming back to the theaters or on the edge about spending how much money it is now to go to the theaters and all of that, hopefully these re-releases like the Phantom Menace get people really excited to at least come back for event films, if nothing else. So I really enjoyed that. A New Hope. I had seen A New Hope in an older theater, you know, an old time kind of art house theater, and this was a lot better experience, obviously, watching it. But I love that film, and start to finish, it is genuinely perfect sci-fi pulp. Absolutely love it. Empire Strikes Back is perfect. Return of the Jedi, again, one of my favorites. That one has now, that used to be somewhere in that like 4, 5, 6 range. It always shifted depending on when I watched it, but it's firmly 4. Like I think my top 4 favorite Star Wars films right now. It's gonna be ever so hard to ever pass them. So loved that. And then the sequels, you know, getting getting a little tired by the time the sequels came out definitely doesn't help them. I think, you know, the more and more we've watched them over the years, the more and more the things that really bug me stand out, and the things that I like, I really like. So they're a mixed bag across the board. Really enjoyed the experience. I highly recommend it for any of you out there who are thinking about, hey, I might be wanting to do the Skywalker Saga Marathon one time if they bring it back next year. I'd highly recommend it. And, you know, you can stay for as many as you want, see what the value is of the ticket. I know because our tickets were not that expensive. They were $45 to watch 9 movies. So it wasn't really a bad deal at all. But I know Disney's at the El Capitan on Hollywood Boulevard, that was $150. So it depends on what your theater's charging. I don't know if I'd say it's worth $150, but I'd say it's definitely worth 45, especially if you're a big Star Wars fan. So I would recommend you guys check it out next year if you think they're going to do it again. And stay tuned because there's 2 big anniversaries next year: Force Awakens 10th anniversary and Revenge of the Sith 20th anniversary. So I would be shocked if those 2 movies at least don't come out in the theaters. And I think we're going to see more Skywalker Saga marathons. We have a couple more chats here to get to before we move on to our next topic, which is going to be the Acolyte. We already discussed Tales of the Empire and the Phantom Menace re-release. If you guys want to, who have just joined us in the chat, discuss some of that, you can send in your questions. Feel free to send in your questions, your comments. If you saw the Phantom Menace recently or you watched Tales of the Empire, you have something to say, maybe some predictions about the future, your review, whatever you want, send it into the chat. We'll get to it as soon as we can. The Geek and I says, took my son, who's three-year-old at the time, to see Attack of the Clones in its release in IMAX. It was amazing. That's awesome. That's such a fun experience. I would imagine as a parent, that's something, if you're a parent who really loves Star Wars, that's something you never forget, especially if it's your children's, first time or amongst their first times watching something you love. I would imagine that's an incredible experience. So glad you got to do that with your son.
And this is probably at the start of IMAX really being deployed all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I was a kid, we used to go to the Science Fleet Center and watch on the Dome IMAX because that was one of the first ways you could really see Star Wars. So if you got to see the Geek and I on that format, that would be crazy to see Star Wars wrap all around you. I can't imagine as a 3-year-old being I'm on Geonosis, I'm on Naboo, I'm on Coruscant, right? Falling off of a speeder with Anakin and Obi-Wan must have been exhilarating for as a kid and even as an adult to see. So yeah, no, I mean IMAX would be probably the only way. IMAX or Dolby Cinema, those would be the only 2 ways I'd watch all 9 movies in one sitting again. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it was the Dome. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that must have been fun. I still have a lot of nostalgia for IMAX in that way because it does feel more enveloping than the IMAX that we have. That's more traditional, and I know there's different slight formats to it compared to an IMAX 70 millimeter. An IMAX back then is just a nicer screen with a single laser. But the Dome is still, even today for a lot of towns and cities, still some of the better places to watch a film in that format because it's big and still that visual clarity it still beats a lot of the regular theater chains.
Mm-hmm. I've never seen a movie in that type of format in those domes, but I remember seeing documentaries, whatever the museums were showing, dinosaur documentary. Those were always interesting experiences. I can't imagine what it's like to see Star Wars in that. So very cool. Upari TB says, how well do you guys think The Mandalorian and Grogu will do considering the budget is around $100 million? Seems like profit will happen no matter what, but how many people will show up? Can't wait for it. Well, if they're keeping it around $100 million, I think you have a very, very high likelihood of it being pretty profitable. I think for me, I would like to see, not that I need the budget to be higher. Obviously, we have a lot of great examples over the last year of movies that were made for significantly less budgets than Hollywood usually is putting into these films. And they were, great. They looked great. They were great. I think a focus on character and story will always supersede no matter how average the film looks. If people like the story, it's going to be successful no matter what. I would like to see them give a little boost to The Mandalorian. I appreciate the volume. I appreciate what they can do, but I would like to see them give it a little boost, take it to that next level visually. If we're going from television to film, there's such a gap, a jump in not just the label of what it means to be a film versus a television show, but the fact that we're all going to see it on the biggest screens possible. I mean, just talking about IMAX, talking about premium formats, you need people to come to these gimmicky premium format theaters to see these types of movies to make the most money possible. I mean, one of the reasons why Avatar is so successful was the 3D innovation. So there needs to be, I think, a little bit more put into the whole experience of seeing The Mandalorian. Why is it so different from watching season 1, 2, or 3, or 4? And so, not that I'm saying the budget needs to be more than 100 million. I was kind of expecting 150 to 200 million based on average blockbuster price. But I think if you're shooting it for 100 million, the movie could be awful. And if everybody goes and sees it once, it's still going to at least break even. So I think they're setting themselves up for success in that likelihood. I think people will show up, to get back to your question, though. I think people will. This is a very highly viewed show. It's definitely the most popular Disney Plus show ever. It's the most popular thing in Star Wars right now. It's in the theme parks. It's all over merchandising. People are familiar with this character and especially Grogu. And if they market that, people will be in the theater to watch it at least once.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I think it's Hollywood accounting, right? It's never going to be 100% what they're reporting. Like, I think last year there was someone was saying the Flash is only like 200, and someone's like the Flash is 450 million. It's like, all right,
Yeah,
well, what's the right number? So I would say a more conservative, smaller number makes sense for this film. I think it is going to end up being closer to 150 or something, and that's fine because they're going to be able to reuse a lot of sets. As much as everyone says the volume is used heavily on these shows, and it is. Like, don't get me wrong, there is still a lot of shooting done on physical sets. I think what's going to be the difference is we're not going to go to some random trail or some park and kind of spruce up parts of it and be like, all right, here is our new planet, right? Like
Tython.
Titan was, right? Yeah, exactly. Titan. Just that still sticks out to me as a sore thumb, especially because I live in Southern California. And when I see that, I'm like, this is like my backyard. Like, I could have shot a Star Wars film here. And it's like, all right, that's when people were like leaking about it, and I'm like, this ended up becoming the Boba episode. I was like, really? Like, yeah, it was great to see Boba. He really cooked in that episode, but it's it's a struggle to watch that episode for the visuals. It's more for what's happening, what the plot is pushing forward. So I figure whatever physical sets we're gonna get, they're not necessarily gonna be mind blowing, but we're gonna be able to see them spruced up way more. We're gonna see a lot more dynamic camera work, more time. Like a big thing about working on, especially with these streaming shows, with the volume being factored in, is that you have to kind of pre-produce all your visuals beforehand, which is very different from adding in your CGI and everything afterwards. So that really scrunches whatever time is already limited to TV even further, presumably. I mean, again, we can't say that for 100% sure, but there is no way you can tell me that the Book of Boba Fett and Mando season 3 didn't feel some crunch, especially with Ahsoka, especially with these other shows that are kind of blocking around it with the restrictions of COVID and all that. Like, you can feel them, especially in parts of Mando season 3, but especially in Book of Boba Fett. And like the speeder chase, it's like that one is technically, I believe, shot on location, like on a studio set, on a sound stage. They have a there are shots of like the buildings that they created for Mos Espa, but why does it look so bad? It's like they don't have much time. They've never really worked with the angle. You have to composite over the bikes and make it look like they're moving fast, and that probably has some volume work involved. And if you're not super experienced with the tech, it shows. I think that was pretty obvious. So whenever we get to see the first images from set and all that, I expect to see scale. I expect to see everything spruced up with extreme attention to detail, but I don't necessarily expect to see something that is like shockingly different than what we saw these first three seasons. Because the way you're going to keep your budget down is you're going to reuse a lot of sets. You're going to reuse a lot of props. You got a lot of the same characters here. I'd say, if anything, the purpose of this film is to get Grogu and Mando reintroduced to most people who have kind of fallen off since 2020, since Mando season 2, when we're all at home. Be like, all right, this happened in season 3. Okay, here's a little recap. Okay, maybe a little tribute to Carl Weathers and Grief Karga, and be like, all right, he passed away, but now there's a threat of this planet being taken over by the Empire again. This was like on their list of planets to target because of their facility and everything. Bam, now you brought back Grogu, now you brought back Din Djarin, and now they are movie level characters instead of just limited to the TV show format for the people's eyes and the imaginations. And now you've elevated them to the level that they were at, I'd say, in 2020, when the only thing we had was a streaming show. Now that everything's kind of opened up, now that movie theaters are desperate for any sort of movie, they will become instant stars again. Even if they've never reached the same highs, they're going to be way more plastered everywhere than they were in 2020. So that's the biggest thing this film has to do: get people out there to remember, like, hey, these guys are cool. unmask Din Djarin probably just to like bring it full circle. Be like, okay, we need to at least have Pedro at least shows his face once before he hops over to shooting Fantastic Four or whatever else he's working on, and then prop up Grogu to be a little bit more of a character than just like, just a little puppet that's there to be cute and all that. I don't know. Outside of that, what would happen? I guess I would love for Thrawn to have involvement in this, especially with a movie budget. I would like to see him in a pure, clean uniform. I'd love to bring the old legend-esque lapels that are actually like fall over his shoulders to make him like look like he's spruced up a little bit more and that he's freshened up. He's back in action. He's not just surviving anymore. Now he's got resources. I'd love to see something like that again. I not gonna lie, I would almost love to see Moff Gideon back and be like, "Aha! What you thought was Moff Gideon was a clone. The real one has always been planning and working around here and working to see where he can put himself into the best position." Because I think Giancarlo and Lars Mikkelsen, facing off against each other, even if they're on the same side, would be awesome to see on screen. But if that doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But if we're thinking about keeping things cheap, some things would have to repeat, right? And I think Moff Gideon, why not bring him to be like used in a different way? I would personally love it, even if I did enjoy the ending. It's not everyone's favorite ending, and once you bring in 10 clones, I'm like, you're telling me there isn't a chance? I'd rather have him show up in multiple clones than a Palpatine show up like 15, 20 times like he does in Legends.
I think he'll be in it for sure. I think this movie is going to be mostly a best of. Like, I think that's my a little bit of a fear for it. But if they take that Force Awakens approach, really, it's something that seems to not age as well, but
Yeah.
people will enjoy it and love it when it comes out. Maybe Star Wars fans are a bit more jaded than they were back in 2015, where they just wanted to see something that felt like the original trilogy. Here, we have so much content that maybe Star Wars fans won't be receptive to it, but I do think if it's a good movie that pleases the general audience, which is going to be what they're really going for, because I think they lost a lot of general audience with Rise of Skywalker. Obviously, the repeat viewings weren't there from general audience because it barely cracked $1 billion, and that should have, been a surefire $1 billion. I think they were pretty disappointed with the box office of that film, and so since this is your comeback film, I think they are going to bring in a lot and try to make it a best of the Mandalorian. You're going to have Bo-Katan make an appearance for a scene. You're going to have Grogu. You might have Ahsoka pop up here or there, depending on what's going on in her story. I do think Thrawn is inevitable because they're going to want to promote the next film. But I think I kind of hope they just save him for end credits or end of the movie as a little tease, as the big villain behind everything, that Thanos-esque tease. Because then people will start researching, who is this? What is this character? Why are we going to have to be afraid of him in the next film? I think all of that's going to be really their angle. I hope it's kind of just a small bounty hunter mission. I mean, $100 million would seem that way, right? Like, that would be cool. I just want the action for sure elevated. I want it to be like it is in season 1 or 2, episode 1. That like movie quality action. It needs to be up there. The storytelling needs to be there. It can't feel like a greatest hits, even if it is a greatest hits. I think that's what they really need to go for. So we'll see what they do. I'm excited for it regardless. I don't think I'm as excited for it as I was when the New Republic movie was supposed to be coming out in the same year, when Dave Filoni was announced to direct it. I was more excited for that than I am for the Mandalorian movie. I'm more excited for Dawn of the Jedi than I am for the Mandalorian movie. But this is a Star Wars movie, and I'm excited to see it. It will be at that point 7 years since we've seen a movie in the theaters that was new for Star Wars. So definitely going to be exciting when it eventually comes out. Geen the Machine says, how does the experience of seeing the Star Wars movies consecutively in theaters compare to seeing them one at a time? That's a great question. For me, well, I think in terms of story, I don't know if it really does much for us because we've seen them all so many times. Like, I don't feel like I got to know the series any better than seeing them one at a time. My girlfriend was also there with us for this marathon, and she's seen Star Wars a few times each, but never all like this. And she was like, I picked out so many things across the movies that I didn't remember from episode 1 to episode 5, type of thing. And so I do think if you're somebody who hasn't seen the movies as many times as we have, you'll start to see the pieces that George was laying across all 6. And you'll start to see it really unfold and come together. So that's pretty cool. Uh, but I think seeing him like this back to back to back, it certainly makes it like I think it's a cool way to track the history of it, but it certainly makes each one kind of the lows start to drag a bit more because there's so much more coming, but the highs just as exciting and like you keep anticipating those highs even more. What about you, Sonic? Did you feel any different seeing all 9 of them consecutively?
Felt a lot more tired about Star Wars. No, no. I mean, it was nice because if we were at like El Capitan, I think I would have actually struggled more because those are like the more old school movie theater seating. Both of the theaters that we were in, we had nice, almost like recliner-esque leather seating, which minimized like my physical awareness. But as far as the movies felt for me, it was like a mix of what you're saying with your girlfriend, with myself, with you. Like I noticed things that I knew already, but didn't necessarily feel the connections between film to film. That is the thing, right? I got to appreciate the trilogy runs a little bit more. I got to appreciate the highs of it, the lows, like you're mentioning, but the connectivity, right? And I think this might be a hot take, but I do think that the prequel trilogy, when you get to watch it in this format, is the most connected. It is the most
Oh yeah.
cohesive in some ways. And if I watch it with a little bit more of like than the 30-minute breaks that we're kind of averaging, I would still say original trilogy, but because we don't let one be anything more than a fading memory, even if the characters almost kind of treated as one in episode 2, watching it, I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, like, I understand this." Like, I see Hayden immediately doing the half smirk that Jake Lloyd had really perfected with that character and how it carries through, and I got to see a lot more of Obi-Wan's charisma in those moments that he's kinda hidden away on the Naboo starship in episode 1, but now it's really coming to full force. And 2 and 3 have always connected really well for me, but 1 and 2, I don't think I've never felt that they're super connected. Now I feel like, yeah, no, they're connected. And 4, 5, and 6, I think 5 and 6 have great connection. I think 4 and 5, it's like almost like at least at the start, yeah, like we are continuing the story, but it's an inverse of A New Hope where it's like, okay, we're throwing ourselves into a bigger world. Now it's like this bigger world is trying to like break us down one by one, and we're the last few things remaining. And I think that's in some ways on like a home watch, it works a little bit better. But in the theaters, I don't know, I felt a little bit of a disconnect. Not much, but a little bit more than I ever remembered. 7 and 8, I think, are obviously super connected because it's like an hour separating them at best,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and I still think 8 and 9, at least at the beginning, feels fairly connected. It does kind of spiral out a little bit more. I just I still wish we had Eye of the Webbish Bog. That I think that would have been a great way to be like, here's an excuse to throw in visions and like flashbacks of what happened in the last 2 films and maybe some things that have happened that we can play off in the movie as like, oh, this is just a possibility of a future or something. And then some other Star Wars media is like, nope, that is what we're going to harvest for our TV show episodes here, something like that. And that would have made everything feel more connected, or maybe seen glimpses of the First Order's rule over the galaxy and a little bit more glimpses of the Final Order and First Order working with each other and like contacting each other. I think that would have made the trilogy a lot more cohesive for me because it is unfortunately the least cohesive, but it really is just 9 that sticks out of the pack for me. I think after this watch, I'm like,
Right.
you put in something in between there, even if it is a year, and I know people are going to be like, it's just a year, you can't do anything. Clone Wars is 3.5 years at best, right? Depending on how you view the 3-year mark. We got 7 seasons. They just recently removed the final season moniker on Clone Wars. So now it looks like they might be adding in more Clone Wars content like Dark Disciple or Crystal Crisis. You can fill in those years with TV shows. Like, it's a big galaxy. 1 year will be enough to do quite a lot. So I'm sure if we get a TV show, and we can have some essential episodes, 7, 8, some of those episodes at 9 will make that trilogy work so much better. But yeah, it was the cohesiveness that really stood out for me. Not necessarily that like, oh, I don't remember these details. It's like, come on, man, we've seen these too many times. Like it's we're fanatics. We're not fans. We're fanatics. So it was just the experience of being like we are actually maybe probably getting the closest feeling to what it is to be inside of the saga as opposed to just viewers picking and choosing movies or like saying like let's do like a quick binge. This was like nope, I'm in it for the long haul to see the galactic history of this family.
Hmm. I think those are all good points. Yeah, nine. 9 for me just every time gets unfortunately worse and worse. But it is that movie. I think The Force Awakens and Last Jedi, obviously, they were like written at the same time, basically.
Yeah,
So they are very tight together. And not that J.J. Abrams made them tight, but Ryan Johnson really went after making them tight.
yeah,
And then the script for 9 that was also written at the same time as 7 and 8, that was scrapped. So now we go with
yeah,
a script that was written in retrospect based on, fan backlash and all those things. Then you see a movie that's very disjointed, disconnected. But yeah, I think, and the prequels, I don't think that's a hot take at all. I think they're certainly the most connected. And it was because it was a single writer the whole time
all
who
three.
had the outline, had for all three together, before he started even filming the first one. I think George, there's always been debate about how much of the original trilogy George had mapped out before he started production on A New Hope. And he's always said all three of them. But obviously, there are certain changes that he definitely made through them. Some big changes, like Luke and Leia being brother and sister. Certain things he had added later and not originally in his draft. So I think he had the arc for Luke all mapped out before they filmed A New Hope. I don't know if he necessarily had it beat by beat, but I think he had the entire arc from farm boy to Jedi mapped out, and the majority of the story about defeating the Empire mapped out. But I don't think he had beat by beat plot for the whole original trilogy mapped out, and that's why he does things with those characters that seem to change dramatically between each one, but somehow he still makes it work to where it feels like it's warranted and was actually part of the plan, even though, if you watch him as many times as us and the history of Star Wars, it definitely wasn't exactly his plan in 1975. But by the time 1982 rolled around, it was. All right, so let's move on to our last topic here. I know we got a few more chats, but before we get too late into the stream, let's move on to the Acolyte and discuss that a bit. And again, for all of you joining us, you can send in your questions, your comments, anything you want to talk about, whether it's Star Wars, movie related, another topic, send it in to the chat as long as it's, constructive. We will bring it up on the live stream here and give you guys a shout out and talk about your chat. We will be going for a little bit more time here, so we want to make sure we get to our last topic, which was the Acolyte. So, like Senek mentioned earlier, those of you who got to see the Phantom Menace 25th anniversary re-release got to also see a preview for the Acolyte, or really it was kind of a scene with a little bit of the trailer we had already seen added to it at the end. So we had that preview to discuss, and then we'll also talk about the Acolyte trailer number 2, which did drop on May the 4th as well, which was very different. I was surprised how different it was than the first one, but very different. Started to give us a bit more of the story. The first one was certainly a teaser. This was more of a direct story trailer. It gave us a look at our bad guy who looks like the Batman who laughs slash Kylo Ren, Knights of Ren, spin-off. I don't know. We'll see what his history is. But Cynic, what were your thoughts on? Let's first talk about that little preview, and then we'll move on to the trailer.
Yeah, definitely a fan of the preview. I thought Amandla Stenberg's character had physicality instead of just Bush inspired like flying around acrobatics, which would have been
Yeah,
more Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon esque,
right.
and I think that would be a little too much for Star Wars. And I personally have never been a fan of that movie, which is a bit of a hot take, but
It is a hot take.
I'm just not a fan of everything being so smooth, right? Yeah, it's just like I get it, I get the fantasy element, I get this like the mythological storytelling of it. I just don't like it. I think that choreography just becomes more of a dance for me than it is fighting. So I was a little worried with the first Acolyte trailer, but seeing the preview, how it's like actually mixed in. Now we know for sure Amanda Stenberg's character has the Force and is using the Force. It makes a lot more sense, and it's grounded. And it was nice to see like the little subtle things, like having um, Trinity, Carrie Ann Moss's characters, her Jedi be like sitting with a table of a bunch of people and just eating food and having conversation, instead of like the Jedi of the prequels who would have been, you know, on their own or like taking over a space, right? This felt like, oh, like this is a little bit more of the High Republic Jedi that I'm seeing. A lot of cool alien designs. A lot of their animatronics look like they were very well done. I do wonder if there's maybe a little bit of crossover between them and Skeleton Crew, because I've heard Skeleton Crew's got a massive budget and a lot of aliens there. So maybe they were just able to work with Phil Tippett and all these guys to get all the best of the old school, the best of the new school, and then just make them work for both of these shows, which are the most different Star Wars shows that we're going to be definitely getting, especially here with this back half of Star Wars out of any of the streaming shows. It was good. It's not a lot, and there were moments where I was like, "Oh man, I wish I got to see a little bit more like a story element." This was just to show like this action is going to be different, but still rooted in what we know about Jedi fighting against powerful fighters, especially those who have the Force. Very reminiscent, I'd say, of like having the Jedi fight against the Night Sisters, or against the Night Brothers, or against the alien species that have like crazy physical abilities. I felt like, okay, now it's like it feels like that animated medium kind of popping onto the screen, big screen here a little bit more, but not too distracting in a way. So yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. And as far as the trailer goes, we knew it was going to be a mystery. I like that they were like, let's make it clear this is a mystery. People are
Yeah.
dying. Jedi are dying. Um, the Jedi are reacting in some ways that are not necessarily in line with your ideals. There seems to be a little bit of like past mistakes kind of coming up to the head. Obviously, now we got to see the unveiling of that Sith, all right, and we don't know if it's a wannabe, if that's an acolyte themselves, the acolyte of the show, or maybe it's a Sith who was part of the original line, or like a line that's trying to take over uh, the main line of Plagueis, Tenebris, Venomous, and all those characters. Yeah, I'm excited for it. I think we saw a little bit more scale too, and we got to see a little bit more of the witches, like the eyes of like one of the Jedi going full black. I'm like, okay, now that is something that could be like a little bit of red herring, like the first characters that the witches are the villains. That's what the trailer is almost trying to point you towards, and then it shows off that dark sider, and you're like, oh man, what does this mean? Why does
Yeah.
he have that freaky mask? Like, what's going on here? The start of the trailer with the pieces alive from Manny Jacinto's character, I'm like, okay, like that's a something. If you don't know Legends, you're like, I don't care. But if you do know Legends in EU, you're like, that is the Sith code being repeated out here by a character who doesn't look anything like a Sith or a Jedi. So it's like, oh, okay, very interesting. So I do wonder if they're the dark sider that we see there. The thing that now, after having done our trailer review, that's really sticking out to me is like there's a chance, I would say, that potentially where we see, and this was also in the first trailer, that the island shots that we got a little bit more of, that looks like Skellig Michael. I do think we might be going to Acto again. It looks very close or very
Mhm.
similar, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same island, because there we've seen it in The Last Jedi. There are a couple other ones implied in the background and all that. But if this happens to be like a way to bring in that, be awesome, because that's the one thing I kind of always am bummed out about by The Last Jedi, and I know that's probably not what other people are thinking about with either their super positiveness or their super negativeness about the film. This being the first Jedi temple with the Prime Jedi symbol and all that, and like the books and everything, I just wanted to see a little bit more of like how did it function as a temple? What history is still like ingrained into the structures, and what's been left behind? It
Mhm.
feels rather small because Luke is like, I'm not showing you anything. But there's so many ways to make like the naturalistic world with all the caretakers and all that, to make
Yeah.
it like, oh, there's like underground passages. There's so many things here on this island. So I hope if it is Ecto that we do get to explore it a little bit more. I know it's
Right.
like nobody's seen this temple, no Jedi seen it. So yeah, maybe not a Jedi, but maybe a manless witch-like character and this Darksider could have found it, that would be super interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, Act 2 is a planet that is, we don't really know much about at all in general because there's kind of a contradiction around it where, like, Han says, "Oh, we think Luke went looking for the first Jedi temple," but then Luke or the Last Jedi, neither one say that it is the first Jedi temple. It's the place where he's protecting the knowledge of the original Jedi, the original sacred Jedi texts, as you hear him yell in the movie. So I would love to see a bit more about that as well. See how it connects to Tython and the other, OG planets, Jeddah of the Jedi. And so that would be pretty cool. I don't know if we'll get down that road to explore all that stuff, but maybe if there was a season 2 or season 3, we could start to lay those seeds for possible connections to the old Republic. That hopefully eventually we finally get the old Republic. But yeah, I love the connections to the Sith already. I love the air of the Sith around this whole thing. Speaking again to the preview as well, I thought the action was a lot better. I know Upri TB says the clip was so good, and I think it was definitely really good as well. Like, you get that Matrix inspiration, obviously an homage with Carrie-Anne Moss, which is an homage to that style of kung fu, as they say they download into their head in the Matrix movie. So I like all that. I think this show where we're going to see the show go, and ultimately something that we're only going to know if we like or dislike by the show unraveling, is what the mystery of the Sith is. And I talked about in our review, there's a lot of ways you can get around the Sith. Like all these people who pretend like they know the Star Wars mythology out there, who are saying that this can break canon. It's not going to break it any more than anything we've seen in the past that has done the same thing. You could argue that breaking the Sith haven't been, or the Sith have been extinct for a millennium line, is the Darth Bane trilogy breaks it, because technically it's less than a millennium after when they fight and finally kill the Brotherhood of Darkness, or Bane does really, and then they fight Bane again later in that book, and he kills all the Jedi. He fights Master Farfalla, and then Bane's still alive after that and fighting Jedi, and then you have Maul fighting him in Shadowhunter, and you have Maul killing a Jedi in the canon miniseries. So there's so many times it's just usually results in the Jedi dying.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I am excited for the show. I'm excited for Dark Side stuff. Dark Side is one of my favorite parts of Star Wars. The side that has not been explored at all in Disney canon. So I want to see it explored more. I want to see the connections to all that. With the introduction of Exegol as well, we have Octu, we have Exegol, we have Jeddah. Those are 3 ancient planets that have been added to the already mountainous library of ancient planets for the Jedi and Sith histories. How do those all connect? I think a show about the Sith should get into it a little bit. I don't know how much it really will. As for the Dark Side guys' design, I do think it's kind of cool. Hope it's not too like goofy when we see it without shadows and stuff, when you see it with light. um, we'll see. But I think depending on the person's character, depending on what they're like, and what actually is underneath the mask, will really make or break whether I love that mask, because I'm still on the fence about it. It looks like Kylo Ren's mask. It really does. The back completely looks like Kylo Ren's mask. I said that in our reaction. So maybe this is a precursor to Knights of Ren, somebody who could lead into be maybe the original Ren. There are a lot of things that could play into that as well. But yeah, there's a lot to look forward to here. Hopefully we still get a Tenebra's cameo at some point, but I think the Acolyte has a promising looking start. I really don't agree with, judging it prior to seeing it. The first trailer certainly had some things that were less enthusiastic than I think I was hoping to be, but ultimately where they are now with the marketing, I mean, I'm going to watch it regardless, obviously, for our show, and because it's Star Wars, I would be watching it if we didn't have a show. But it's something that I'm still holding out hope for because of the subject matter. I really want this to be awesome. So we'll see. Hopefully it is. And that takes us lastly to your guys' questions. So send in your chats about the Acolyte, about Tales of the Empire, about the Phantom Menace, about the Skywalker Saga, if you want to talk about that, about anything in the future, because we do have some chats here that aren't related to Star Wars. You're welcome to send in non-Star Wars related topics as well. Let us know what you think in the chat, and we will finish up with your guys' chats and then probably wrap the stream once we do so. So on to the next chat here. I believe it was the Geek and I who said that they saw the Attack of the Clones reformatted into the square visuals in that Dome IMAX because it was originally shot digital. Yeah, all the prequels really pushing that boundary with the digital technology. I bet that looked a little strange back then as well, and recompressed into that aspect ratio, the 4:3. But yeah, cool. I'm glad you still got to see that and have that experience. Avintaj says, busy tonight, but had to stop by and say, keep up the great work. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all the support. And Rohan says, killing it, boys. Thanks so much. We appreciate your support as well. Uperi TB says, theater clip of Acolyte was so good. We got to that one earlier. And then Colton says, sequels have aged poorly. The idea of Luke contemplating assassinating his nephew still bothers me. Yeah, you could take that one, Sonic. I mean, for me, it's never worked, I would say. I love the scene. I think the scene is cool. I like the homage to Rashomon. Never loved that idea, and especially the more and more I've watched Return of the Jedi, the more and more I've disliked it. But it's not necessarily a movie breaking thing for me, that scene. But I think the way, for me, I mean, I've said this so many times on our streams, and Sonic and I, because we're not too far apart on The Last Jedi, but I certainly like it less than he does. I've said so many times when we've talked that I think most of what Luke's journey in The Last Jedi would work a lot better if he was one of the leads in The Rise of Skywalker, which they could have easily done. Just cut his death scene. It's a great scene. Maybe you could have done it again in The Rise of Skywalker the same way. It's a great scene. It's beautiful. I love it. But it doesn't work for me in The Last Jedi. Having this character who's at a low point, who we haven't seen how he gets to that low point, it's all off screen. It's completely different than where he is at the end of Return of the Jedi, completely different than who he is, obviously, in Legends. And then you take that character, change him completely off screen. All you get is a little hint at why he's different. And then he comes back to who we all wanted to see in The Last Jedi, and he's back. But then you kill him immediately. I think they should have saved him for The Rise of Skywalker or whatever episode 9 was, whether it was Duel of the Fates, Rise of Skywalker, whatever. They should have saved him, especially, and I harp on this so much. You knew Carrie Fisher had passed away in 2016, a year before the movie came out. So you knew that you were going to either have to somehow figure out how to get her into Rise of Skywalker like they did with old footage, or you were going to just have no living original trilogy members besides Chewbacca in that movie. I think it was a major mistake. I'm glad they went with the creative decision. I support Disney from that perspective as well, letting the creators do what they want, right? But that might have been where, a studio interference might have been a good thing, where you step in and you're like, okay, we let you do all these things with Luke this whole movie, and we appreciate what you went for creatively, but we need somebody from the original trilogy alive in episode 9. And right now we're missing Carrie Fisher, and you knew she was missing for a year. You knew she wasn't going to be there. I think they really somebody should have stepped in and said, hey, we might need to take this scene out of Mark Hamill dying because we need Luke in the next movie, or they should have written Luke to be a major character. But back to you, Sonny. What do you think about the Luke assassination scene?
Yeah, I mean, I would never call it character assassination because I grew up reading, kind of very distinctly reading a lot of the Arthurian tales. That was like my first real foray outside of fantasy books like Harry Potter and all that into like what fables and myths can be told like. And I never made the connection as a kid that this is essentially the same thing what Star Wars is doing, what George Lucas has been doing from 1977, and what Disney has not been as successful in, but is trying to do. Uh, and the nature of this being a story set 30 years after Return of the Jedi does mean it's going to be closer to the aesthetics, the politics, the world that we live in, which is more divided, more complicated. And Rian Johnson, I'll give him credit here in the sense that he knows that, and he's like, I don't care. I'm gonna make the film that I'm gonna make, and he did, right? And you can say like, I wasn't a fan of having Luke die at the very end, but the whole story is telling Luke like, yeah, he's gonna die if he does this. Now I get the idea of changing it, I agree. I in the sense that knowing that Carrie died, you should have made sure that Luke's story is not finished in The Last Jedi because he doesn't have a role in The Rise of Skywalker other than be like, this is me and I'm great and happy again because of like what you showed me, because of what the galaxy showed me. I finally what Master Yoda really stamped home. Right now, I'm back to who I was. Plus, I'm better now, right? I've grown from my mistakes. I get the purpose of making it like classic in JJ's interpretation for The Rise of Skywalker. I never agreed with it in the sense that I think you could have made him do more as a character. You could have still had Rey like be with all the I want all the Jedi, be with me, all the Jedi, all these things, right? And that is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. Like it's a great thing to have Luke still show up and give her that motivation and give a little bit of Leia backstory, especially because Leia becomes her master. But he ends The Last Jedi saying, "See you around, kid," to Kylo. He's like, "I'm gonna haunt you." And he doesn't haunt Kylo at all in the story. It would have
Never
been
sees him
fast.
again.
Yeah, he never does. And that I think bothers me more. As much as people want to say like, "Oh, Ryan's a hack," or all these other things, like, well, he gave a very concrete thing for Luke to do in the third film. Regardless if he dies or not, he's gonna be invading Kylo's life, right? He's gonna be causing issues and distress because he's like, you know what? I might not be able to turn you. I'm just here to say I'm sorry for what I did. But for the sake of the resistance, for the sake of Rey, for the sake of the future of the Jedi, I am going to be in your face and annoying you, right? And that was what he's going to be. And then it's just not there, right? Like I still think you could have fit in one one scene with him annoying Kylo, right? Like again, this would have been a great time to have him like manifest himself with Eye of the Webbish Bog. Just do something to mess with his brain a little bit more, show him a possible future, show him these things that could have been different about his past, force the Luke down his throat that he doesn't want to, and then force him to be like, you know what, I've already killed all these things. Luke Skywalker's gone, but he's affecting me. I need to take Palpatine. And you could have done something. You could have kept the full structure of the beginning of the Rise of Skywalker and spaced it out a little bit more. So that I will say is the bigger problem for me than anything else. As far as like the character assassination, no, I don't agree with that because look, Luke at the even after watching Return of the Jedi, I love that. I love his story in Return of the Jedi, even if I don't love the structure of Return of the Jedi because of Jabba's palace and everything happening there. But I do love that, he sees a man full of evil, but amongst that evil, he sees like the embers of light still in him. And he's like, I want to blow the wind on and I want to make it light up and flare up again, right? Like everything he's doing is sacrificial. He literally throws away his lightsaber here and he's like, I don't need this. Like I know what I am as a Jedi. I know what my father was. And it works. At the end of the day, he manages to bring his father back from that husk that has been walking around held together by anger and all these things. But to go back to Arthurian legends, right? Like these things, like it's a wonderful story, it's a classic mythological story. But what happens after the myth is completed, right? That is a big thing about the later Arthurian legends. Like after the Knights of the Round Table come together, it's awesome, it's great, woohoo, awesome, right? But it falls apart. The families are destroyed. There's so much internal bickering. Personal things go crazy and wrong for Arthur that by the end he is like kind of left alone. Like the Green Knight is one of the greater examples of these later Arthurian legends, and it's still not the late versions where you see Arthur just a shell of who he is, right? And to take that concept and then put it here and be like, Luke made this mistake where this kid who's full of life, full of good, full of Han, full of Leia, and he sees for a moment this darkness that's been making him afraid, reminding him of what he suffered for, the responsibilities that he has in the galaxy. He turns it on. I'm not saying that isn't a horrible mistake, and I still think that the film should have doubled down and have like Hamill react a little bit more, like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" instead of just and then Ben Solo just like staring and like what? Like I wanted to see more reaction from both of them. It should have still been a completely bad mistake from Luke. That's the point. He made a terrible choice. He didn't follow through with it 100%, but that 5 to 10% that he did was wrong. And it's a natural thing when you've worked so hard to build up something that was eradicated for decades by the empire, by your father, knowing that, like, oh my god, I thought all I had to do was just change the galaxy and save my father, and now you're telling me this is going to repeat again within my own family. Of course that's going to make you afraid. He's not the same 20-year-old willing to walk into force lightning, right? He's like a 50-year-old man who's like, I've done so much and it's still not enough. And again, this comes down to the fact that we do not have the 30 years to flesh him out as a character, to show his struggles, to show his fears, to show his successes, the things that he's done, the things that he's failed at. He's not a perfect Jedi. He's scrapping things together like a scavenger, right? Even if he's got stuff from the High Republican comics and all that, it's not enough the same way that the prequel Jedi have like an entire planet full of like, okay, here's our library, here is our training grounds. He doesn't have that. Even by the end, he still has like expanded huts. That's basically all he's been able to do because it's hard. The Empire's eradicated everything. He's fought tooth and nail by the end, by this point, with his strongest Padawan, who is his family. And then to see that spark come again, it's like, oh man, right? And you don't have to love it. I'm not going to tell you don't love it, but that's how I look at it. That he made that mistake that the late Arthur legends do. But unlike those late Arthur legends, Ryan gave him a chance to redeem himself. Now, the mistake is you could have continued it further because the whole message is like, I've learned from my mistake, right? That he says in The Rise of Skywalker. Well, if he did, then we would have seen more of that classic Luke that's always in your face. He's like, I'm just going to be a little annoying and whiny, but, this is going to work out in my favor here. That's the Luke that we see in Empire. That's the one we see in A New Hope. That's the one we see struggling in Return of the Jedi, but it comes out at the right moments. We do not see that in The Rise of Skywalker. Liam and I are on the same page. We have different ideas, obviously, of what could have been done, but of how, if he survived or not. But he should have been a player, at least for one more scene. I think that one scene with the X-Wing is fine, but that's just too much nostalgia bait. You want to take Luke to the next step, make him like a Force Ghost asshole. He's like, all right, well, if I can't help out Rey directly at all times, if my sister's dealing with that, what can I do on this front? Make Kylo even more unstable and more doubtful of his choices now that he's the Supreme Commander. He thinks he's finally gotten everything, but he's left without Rey. Okay, now let's make him remember his family, remember all these things that he's chopped down and destroyed because he's thinking about killing the past, right? Well, here I am as a reminder. Hey, remember when we did that? Oh, remember that mission? He could have just been so annoying and been a great portrayal of Luke and what he means as like a hopeful character. Once again, you don't do that. I blame JJ. I don't blame Ryan. I think Ryan could have changed his ending, but I blame JJ for doing nothing with Luke's character other than to be like, here's a flashback with Leia. It's like, okay, fine, but Carrie Fisher is not there to add more than 5-10 minutes. And he refused to use scenes from The Last Jedi that could have made her character feel longer. I blame The Rise of Skywalker. I don't really blame The Last Jedi for that.
That's fair. I mean, I blame them both.
Yeah.
Rian Johnson is an awesome filmmaker. He's an incredibly nice person. He, yeah, I feel like sometimes this is a thing that you can get into when you're writing, right? You can get so into your own head. You can feel like it's hard to put yourself in the audience perspective of how do they feel. You are so inside these characters and knowing exactly what you want them to portray, how it feels to be them, how other characters are interacting with them, how the galaxy is reacting to them. And he ultimately, by the end of the Last Jedi, he does make Luke the greatest hero that the galaxy has ever seen. Right? That's the point. But in a lot of other ways, knowing your real world audience, I think, is especially when they're Star Wars fans. You have to do it. And I think when you have a character like that, a character who we've been waiting for 30 years to see the Grandmaster version, to see the most epic version of this character ever, and then you put him into that type of situation where the whole movie is about his arc and coming back to that Grandmaster that we always wanted to see. And then to never actually get to see it after that, just one scene. I think that is one of the most frustrating things that's done with Luke in the movie. Really, to me, it's the most frustrating thing. I can, as much as I don't love the idea of him just being completely broken from the beginning. I personally, all the build up in my head for years, I wanted to see this truly epic Luke for 2, 3 movies. I'm okay with the arc as long as, again, the next time you see him, he gets to continue that. He gets to be that top tier character, and he wasn't. And if you wanted to do the Obi-Wan thing and be like, he becomes more powerful than you could possibly imagine by dying, then that's also where I agree with you that if they can, because they decided to keep the death, then they should have brought him back to be a major player. He's fighting Palpatine again. All those people who say, how does that the weight of Return of the Jedi lose a lot of its the Chosen One prophecy with Anakin killing Palpatine, and then now he's back again, even though he's not back. He's a spirit, and he's not alive until he somehow sucks the dyad out of them. But anyway, he he's that prophecy, that whole Skywalker nature of that prophecy, right, would have felt at least you're paying homage, kind of respect building upon Return of the Jedi if Luke is there part of the destruction of Palpatine once and for all again. This time, instead of being inactive, he takes action. He fights him on a spiritual level. All those types of things you could have done with The Rise of Skywalker to make that ending of The Last Jedi better. Instead, it was like a double double problem where you're disappointed he's gone, and then you're more disappointed that he never comes back. And I think that's one of their biggest flaws. It's one of the reasons why Luke is one of the weaker handled characters in that trilogy, especially from the OT, is because the biggest problem in the trilogy is the transition from Force Awakens, The Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker. There's no cohesion in there, and that unfortunately is where Luke's place in the story is. Han doesn't feel as mismanaged, or Leia doesn't feel as mismanaged because they're key pieces of the Force Awakens Last Jedi duology. The Rise of Skywalker kind of epilogue to that duology. That's where you needed more Luke, and ultimately they missed out on that. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
We can't really do anything about it. All we can do is go back to that 30 years and fill it in. And hopefully Mark Hamill gets one more chance to make that stamp with the fans on being Grandmaster Luke. I think I'll be completely satisfied with that if we can see Grandmaster Luke with Mark Hamill one more time.
And just to add to that, right? Like we see it. Well, we don't see it, but we have Shadow the Sith to show that he is super capable. He is doing these things. He is fighting for the right. He's standing up. Throughout the book, he is almost overmatched at points, right? I think one of the best parts about Luke is that everyone's assuming, based off his Legends version, that he's going to be super, ultra, mega powerful. But to be fair, we never saw Anakin in Legends when he was being written to be this super, uber powerful Jedi Academy, New Jedi Order Luke, right? By the time we got to see Anakin, and we finally got to see the full scope of like the prequel Jedi, it's like, oh man, now we've almost overbalanced the scales. What makes the chosen one, right? It's like it almost feels like his Vader is more powerful than sometimes his Anakin is. So you don't have to make him uber powerful. You just have to make him symbolic like you do at the Last Jedi, and then continue and actually help out Rey. It just doesn't happen. And for that ending, I know we've seen so many fan edits of like, oh, the Jedi, like their ghosts show up and all that. I think it would have been great, even if we have one scene of him messing with Kylo, have one scene with him showing up for Rey and be like, okay, I'm gonna help you out here. And then you see like other hands kind of almost missed up, so we don't have to have like, oh, cameo galore fest. We have Luke, and then for the very end, the Rise of Skywalker title to work, to have Kylo, now Ben, rise up and then almost be given a hand, and he grabs it and it ends up being Anakin, right? That would have been great too. So then you could have had it a moment and been like, oh, and like Anakin doesn't even have to say much. He just is like, do what needs to be done. Make sure my legacy. His line literally is like, make sure to keep the balance, like I once did, right? He can basically tell the thing to Ben and then make sure that the balance is kept by helping out Rey, by reviving her. You can do these things with simple tweaks, but it just doesn't happen. And I know, like I don't want to bag on JJ too much, but if we're going to get controversial, I don't think he was the right guy for the entire trilogy, only for one movie. And bringing him back over Trevorrow, I think that was still a good option. But Duel of the Fates still has some interesting things that a more better versed Star Wars writer like JJ to Ryan was, right? I think that Ryan, if he did 9, would have handled it better if he had Trevorrow's ideas to pull from. It just is what it is. Now we just have to hope for the 30 years to really, really have some incredible stories.
Well, we've got to move on because we've been going on that question from Colton for a long time. But always appreciate the rantings about the sequels. I'm sure you guys definitely appreciate that as well. We got two super chats in the meantime. One from Geen the Machine, who says, "Thanks for the great analysis and dedication to bringing us all things Star Wars. Was trying to send with the previous messages, but great job, lads. Thank you so much for your support for the channel, and we always appreciate you joining us for this live stream." The Toydarian Dan also sent a super chat, said, "Would you guys go to a Harry Potter marathon or a Lord of the Rings marathon?" 100% Lord of the Rings I
Yeah.
would go to. Even if they were showing all 3 Hobbits, I would definitely go watch all 6. Harry Potter, I might go for parts of. I don't know if I could do a 24 hours Harry Potter because those movies are all longer than Star Wars in general on average. And I'm just not as into Harry Potter, but I do like it enough to where I would go and watch, some of my favorites. I don't know if I'd stay for the whole thing though.
Yeah, definitely Lord of the Rings. And I know Lord of the Rings is supposed to be back for all 3 extended editions, which it's 1 per day, which I think is a lot more manageable than what we did with the
Yeah.
marathon and being at 24 hours. And I would, I'm thinking about going to it. I already saw, and I think Liam, you also said you saw the extended edition last year of Return
Yeah.
of the King, which is great. But, it's interesting, right? Like I felt more tired watching Return of the King sometimes than I was during some of the movies of the marathon for Star Wars because it is 4.5 hours for one story. Sometimes you can marathon these films, but you need to have like a little bit more of like the average traditional length. I think if we were told to marathon all 3 Lord of the Rings films back to back to back, I'd love it, but I would not start it at 8 p.m. like we did here for the marathon
No.
for Star Wars. That I think that would genuinely like knock me out because it's poetic language. It is often like a lot of talking more so than it is action compared to Star Wars, right? It's Star Wars in some ways is simpler to follow along than Lord of the Rings is, and Lord of the Rings is in of itself already a simplification of the books for many people. So, could you imagine if they had like the poetry and the songs or the books in the extended edition somehow? I think people would have fallen asleep super fast, even if they love it, right? So, no, not to that. Harry Potter, I grew up on the movies. I definitely also grew up on not as much as the books, but I don't know. It's not the type of fantasy I appreciate anymore. I like high fantasy. I like where there's established magic rules and limitations. And if there isn't that, I like it when the world is super developed. There's a lot of things about Harry Potter that I don't think are super developed these days. It almost feels like caricature at times, and it's fun, but it's almost low fantasy because it's so grounded in 1990s UK, and at the end of the day, your main villain is a guy trying to kill like a 13-year-old kid for for the majority of the book and he can't beat his wizarding school versus Lord of the Rings, the fate of Middle Earth, Star Wars, the fate of the galaxy, right? Oh, it's like can't beat a teenager because the power of love protects him. It's like okay, it's fun. It's good storytelling in parts. There's definitely some controversy around it too. So that doesn't really make it as easy for me to entertain and access as it used to be when I was a kid. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think Harry Potter has aged as well for me. The later movies are also pretty drab visually at times. Like I get the seriousness of them, but it starts to get kind of lose its color palette in a way that I don't think I've ever felt about any Star Wars film. And then Fantastic Beasts, if there's any like prequel spin-off of like a major franchise that has not done well at all and has in some ways made the universe worse, I would say Fantastic Beasts. So probably no to Harry Potter. Lord of the Rings if it's every day, not if it's all extended editions. And I've never seen the theatrical ones, so all extended editions every day, but all at once, I think I would actually struggle with that a little bit here and there.
It would be rough. I feel like right now, when you have flown to another country and then you fly let's say a year later to another state, you feel like, man, I can accomplish anything, right? Like this is such a short flight, 6 hours was a short flight. I feel like that's going to be how I feel about Lord of the Rings if I were to watch the extended editions in theaters. They're not going to feel long anymore after just doing the Skywalker Saga Marathon. We're in the theater for 24 hours. So I'm pretty hyped for them. I already have tickets to all three of the extended editions coming in June. So I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah, I would prefer the like day by day for pretty much any franchise besides Star Wars. Star Wars is one of the only ones that could get me to go that night. But Lord of the Rings would be the only other one that might. There are some trilogies I would do all in the same day for sure, and trilogies are a lot easier. Like if it was the Dark Knight trilogy or something like that. But yeah, Harry Potter, especially if Fantastic Beasts were also involved, that would make it 11 movies. And those last three, I would absolutely leave for. I would not stay. I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, you should have left during the sequels," and there were some people who did, but I at least enjoy the sequels enough to watch them or sit through them. The Fantastic Beasts, I've seen all three of them. The first one's okay. Like I think the first one's a fun little spin-off movie,
Yeah.
but it doesn't need the importance that it has. And the second one and third one, they're unbearable. The second one's so boring, and the third one is it was such a weird story. So yeah, don't like that. But yeah, thanks for your question, Twidarian Dan. Definitely appreciate the super chat. So we'll get to these last couple questions here. Colton says, unrelated to Star Wars, but what are your guys' most anticipated movies for the rest of the year? Well, that's a great question. And May actually, for me, has a lot of them. Like, I think for me, one of the top most anticipated movies by far of the year, one of my favorite movies of all time, Mad Max Fury Road. I can't wait for Furiosa. I'm very excited for that, and I can't wait to see that. Talking about Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, very excited for that. Can't wait to see our first real look at it. The fact that it's created by a Japanese filmmaker too, like I think marrying kind of anime and Lord of the Rings, not something I ever thought we'd need, but it's going to be awesome. And then one that nobody really talks about, I'll give a shout out to Deadpool and Wolverine as well. That's going to be awesome. That's going to be a return to form, I think, for the MCU finally. And really, all they need to do is hit like a 3.5 out of 5, and it's a return to form for the MCU. But the one nobody's talking about, it's been on my most anticipated list for 3 years or so now. And every year it keeps getting pushed back. I think it's finally confirmed to come out this year, is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. Obviously, Nosferatu is one of those seminal horror movies. I enjoyed it a lot when I watched it. It is dated, but the shots are so iconic. The staging of horror in that is brilliant. Robert Eggers is one of my favorite filmmakers, just bar none. I loved every one of his movies. And so I cannot wait to see his take on Nosferatu. The Lighthouse is a movie I rewatch all the time. It's one of my favorite movies. And so I can't wait to see Nosferatu from Robert Eggers. But there's a lot of cool ones coming out this year. Anything I mentioned, Joker also, that looks cool. Anything else I mentioned, Cynic, that you're interested in seeing, or ones I haven't mentioned that you're also looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't. I feel pretty bad because I actually haven't seen a lot of films this year in theaters, and I mean, the only ones I saw that are new were Dune Part Two. Um, I saw End of Evangelion, which was nice because that's I'll count that as like a new because it was never in North America, and that was pretty awesome. Even though I'm like many years separated from watching the series a couple times over. Monkey Man was a pretty underrated one that I enjoyed watching. Civil War, I wasn't planning on watching it. I ended up watching it, and I like it quite a bit more than expected. But like the movies that I am excited for that I still haven't seen yet, I want to see Fall Guy. I've heard pretty good things, and I'm a huge fan of Ryan Gosling. I've seen everyone's been like, oh, it's Barbie that turned him into comedic star. It's like, no, he was funny even in something like Remember the Titans, right? But the movie that I think
Nice Guys.
Nice Guys, that's what I'm saying, right? That is the comedic role of a lifetime, and everyone just chose to watch Neighbors 2, Sorority Rising over that, which bums me out. Like, please give us at least one sequel, Shane Black. I just need them for one more adventure with just the main trio. That's a great movie, but movies to see this year, right? I want it. Challengers for sure. I need to see that. I love Reznor and Ross's scores. Like, they're so good. Kingdom of
Good.
the Planet of the
Good.
Apes. I really need to see that. I haven't watched I haven't seen any of them, and I want to at least watch
Really?
no, never at all. And I want to see
Hmm.
the CGI reboots that have been really well received, especially Dawn is super well received.
I love Dawn.
So I want to watch those. Uh, Deadpool, Wolverine versus Deadpool for sure. The more I hear about it, the more excited for. Oh man, there's it's a weird year because like the writer strike and the actor strike ruins so much about like the movies that are supposed to be coming out this year. But I don't know. Let me do a quick scan here.
Yeah, I just pulled
Uh,
up the list too. One that I think not on my radar. Love the original, but not on my radar until I've heard a lot of people talking about it recently, like the cast and crew saying it was so much fun to make. Was Beetlejuice Beetlejuice? I think that's going to be kind of a
yeah,
sleeper hit. I think that's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that. Tim Burton coming off of Wednesday, and he hasn't had like a massive hit in the theater in a while.
in
I'm
decades,
hoping this is a
probably. Yeah.
return to form for him in the theater. I can't wait to see what he has in store with this movie too.
What would be the last one? Like Alice in Wonderland, right? Maybe.
Probably the last big financial hit. Yeah.
Yeah,
I saw
that's
his Dumbo in
nice.
the theaters and I didn't really like it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think what else. He's had a couple dramas here and there that were good, but nothing to that explosive level from a box office standpoint, and nothing of like super high quality like his run in the 2000s and 90s. So yeah, that's a pretty hype one for sure.
Man, I totally forgot. No, I wanna see, I think it's still scheduled for this year, Gladiator 2. I haven't seen Gladiator,
Yeah.
so I know it's like sequel slash spinoff, but I'm a huge Paul Mescal fan. Pedro Pascal as well is also in it. Like I think Denzel's in it, so it's like a pretty stacked cast, and I'm excited to see
Hmm.
that. I've fallen off of Pixar so much, but I want to see Inside Out too, just because
Yeah.
I need to force myself to go back in theaters. Furious, I'm most excited for. Oh yes,
Alien.
Alien, that new Alien movie, that looks very promising. I thought it was streaming, but I heard it's gonna be released, which makes me
Yeah.
feel pretty happy about. If anything, Twisters. I haven't seen Twister, but I wanna see Twisters. I'm a huge Daisy Edgar Jones fan, and I've been following her career ever since Normal People. The trailers just give me that vibe of like this could be the dumbest blockbuster ever, but it's got so much heart to it that doesn't matter. It's gonna be like your Midwestern Avengers or something happening here. I'm excited for that, uh, for sure. That ah, I don't know what else is there this year. There's a lot
I
of
pulled up I pulled up my list I had made before the year started. There's not that much of like those top tier franchises, you know.
yeah.
A lot of them are coming out in the first half of the year. Moana 2 this year. Moana is a great movie. I'm excited to see this. I've heard the one thing that's a little scary is people have said that it was supposed to be a TV show that they've combined into a movie. So that doesn't necessarily always work, but I think it works better than usually having, the reverse. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Maybe it'll be a longer animated movie, which could be cool too. But Moana is a great movie. It's been like number one streaming movie forever, so it's not a shock it's coming out. I really love A Quiet Place, so I'm excited for A Quiet Place day one, but not
Hmm,
necessarily as excited as the John Krasinski movies, just because it's a
yeah.
new set of characters, a new time period. I feel like some of that movie, a lot of it is gimmick based, so after the gimmick, it loses a little bit of its luster, and so you have to kind of really get us to fall in love with the characters, and that's what works so well about A Quiet Place 2 is the fact that the characters are still great, where the gimmick loses a little bit of it. And speaking of Krasinski, I'm excited to see his kids movie. If I
Yeah.
think that could be a fun little movie. Ryan Reynolds, always funny, so that could be good. Yeah, there's not Sonic 3's coming out. Borderlands, not sure about
Uh,
Borderlands.
yeah, I don't think Borderlands is gonna be good. Cuckoo, that one with Hunter Schafer, that looked pretty interesting from the trailer. It's like a horror
Mhm,
movie, a horror thriller, I guess. The Bike Riders is also this year, and I want to see what Austin Butler and Tom Hardy and
mhm.
I'm forgetting her name. Uh, she's in The Last Duel. She's in
Oh, yeah,
Jodie
Comer,
Cromer. She's in that too. So
The Rise
I'm
of
looking for.
Skywalker.
Yeah, she's also. Great actress, right?
She's Ray's mom.
Ray's mom, yeah. So
Garfield.
I I think this could actually like win like some support, like in the sense of
Think
like
it too.
it looks like the animation looks very classically Garfield, which I think was been missing from his most recent stuff, which has been a while, honestly. But yeah, I think it can be good. It feels like it has a chance of almost becoming like a Minions 2 phenomenon.
Yeah.
I think that could be that type of movie that it's just like somehow people latch on to. So I
Yeah.
can see
There's
that.
the speaking of the Minions, there's Despicable Me 4: The Rise of Jokic is coming out.
Yeah,
That one, I I've seen the other ones. I guess I'll see that probably too.
yeah,
Mufasa from Barry Jenkins is like one that I'm not that excited for, besides the creative team behind it, but that could end up being actually kind of great.
yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot coming out, but there's nothing from like those top tier franchises. I mean, we've already gotten Dune Part 2 and Madam Web, so it's hard to come back from those. But
Yeah.
we'll see. Let us know what some of your guys' most anticipated movies in the chat or in the comments. But that's gonna wrap it up for our stream tonight. That was a fun stream. It was fun to talk about some non-Star Wars things, or kind of let loose, not focus on the Bad Batch. But we'll be back every week. Again, we'll let you guys know when our streams are going to go live, but we'll be back every week doing lives, discussing anything in the world of Star Wars news or just anything in general. We're going to do live Q&A. So hopefully you all join us even between shows. And then, of course, we'll be back night of, because I believe Acolyte is like Ahsoka release, where it's coming out on Tuesday nights. So we'll be back like Ahsoka, where right after Ahsoka ends, or right after Acolyte ends, we'll be going live talking about Acolyte episodes on Tuesday nights. So make sure you join us for that when that eventually starts in about a month. But in the meantime, enjoy these live streams, and hopefully you guys keep joining us and talking about whatever you guys want. This is your time to ask us anything. And we love talking film, as you guys have seen with our discussions about Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter or movies coming out this year. So you can always bring up anything you want in the world of movies or pop culture or anything. This is your chance to ask us anything you want for the rest of the month, until we eventually get to Acolyte and it's a much more streamlined focus for those streams. But thank you so much for watching. We've had a lot of content on the channel recently. There was the Acolyte trailer review, where we give you guys probably a little bit more concrete thoughts on the trailer if you want to check that out. And then we also had our Tales of the Empire review, where you can check out our thoughts on that. We have our vlog going up tomorrow that we did from the Skywalker Saga Marathon. Have my Dark Times movie or show pitch coming out at the beginning of next week, and then a tier list where we rank Star Wars eras also coming out next week. Stay tuned for all of that. Of course, shorts every other day, and community polls still voting on your favorite Star Wars characters. I'm going to give you guys an update tomorrow, because it's been a while we've been doing this tournament, and there's so many Star Wars characters that I've been waiting for a lot of the results to come in, but only a few so far have not lost a match. So I'm going to show you guys who those are tomorrow in the community section. But that's going to do it from us at Star Wars Labs. Thank you all so much for watching this stream, and we will see you all next week for the next one.